Some wounds don't bleed. Some battles aren't fought with bullets. And sometimes, the war finds you long after you thought it ended. In the town of Larkhaven, an old black veteran kept his head down, fixed cars, and lived with dignity. Until the day a uniformed threat came through his door and forced him to make a phone call he never thought he'd need to make again. If stories like this stir something in you, stories about justice, family, and quiet strength, take a moment to comment where you're watching from and subscribe. It helps bring more truth into the light. Now, let me tell you what happened. Elias Munro had hands like weathered stone, scarred, powerful, and precise. At 71, he still showed up to his garage 6 days a week. He didn't believe in slowing down. Slowing down, he always said, was just a fancier word for giving up. The place smelled like motor oil, steel, and memory. He'd built Munro Automotive from the ground up after returning from Vietnam. No handouts, just grit, grease, and God. He was underneath a '68 Dodge Charger adjusting the timing chain when the bell above the garage door chimed. "Be right with you," he called out. Then came the voice. "Take your time, old man. You've got all day." The wrench slipped from his fingers, clattering against the concrete. Not out of fear, out of recognition. 3 shadows moved into the sunlight. Deputy Cole Anders, tall and smug, stood at the front. Behind him were Deputies Fisher and Lanning, younger, leaner, smirking like this was just another errand. Elias slid out from beneath the car and stood. His spine didn't bend for anyone. "Morning, Sheriff's Office," he said calmly. "What can I do for you?" Anders walked forward slowly, eyes wandering over the garage. "Hell of a place you got here. Been running it long, 42 years next spring." Anders gave a tight smile. "Impressive. Must have made a good living." Elias wiped his hands on a stained blue rag. "Made an honest one." "See, that's the thing," Anders said. "The town's changed. Folks like you don't pay your community dues. Things might stop working in your favor. Inspections, complaints, fire hazards. You get it." Elias didn't blink. "You trying to sell me protection, I'm offering you a chance to stay in business. And if I say no," Fisher stepped closer, "then maybe next time something breaks around here, it won't be a car part." Elias's fingers curled. "I've been shot at by people who don't speak my language, slept in trenches with rats chewing on my boots, and buried brothers who never got to grow old. And you? Come in here with a badge and a threat." Anders smiled smug now. "You think your war stories matter here?" Elias's eyes narrowed. "You ever seen what war does to a man who comes back with his soul intact?" "No, then you should pray I stay calm." A silence settled in the garage, thick as fog. Then Anders leaned in and whispered, "Your son's still deployed, right, Darius Munro? Recon Marine. Be a shame if something complicated happened to him while you were being stubborn." Elias's jaw didn't move, but something behind his eyes did. "You've made your point," he said. "Now get off my property." They left laughing. That night Elias didn't sleep. He watched the street through the blinds, saw the parked car that didn't belong, saw someone get out and take a photo of his shop. So he made the call. It rang once, twice. Then a voice answered, crisp, alert, deadly calm. Dad Elias didn't hesitate. They came. The silence that followed was deep. Then came the reply, "I'll be there in 36 hours." The Greyhound station in downtown Larkhaven didn't see much traffic at sunrise. A homeless man muttered to himself by the vending machines. A janitor wiped the same corner 3 times just to stay awake. Then a black SUV pulled up. The engine cut. The door opened. Staff Sergeant Darius Munro stepped out in a civilian jacket duffel slung over one shoulder and combat boots that still carried desert dust. He moved like someone who forgot how to relax, shoulders tight, eyes constantly scanning, footsteps silent but certain. He wasn't back for a holiday. He was back for war. Elias stood in the driveway of his shop, watching the sun rise behind the busted remains of his garage windows. The sprayed paint still screamed from the brick wall, "Know your place." His hands were trembling, not from fear but from restraint. He didn't turn around when he heard the SUV roll up. He didn't have to. "I told you to stay out of this," Elias said softly. "I didn't come for permission," Darius replied. Elias faced him, then really looked at him. The boy who used to fix lawnmowers with him. The man now built of scars and silence. "You said they made threats," Darius continued. "Didn't know they were this stupid. They were born stupid. The badge just made them bold. They stood in front of the shattered shop, father and son, the past between them like a thick fog neither was ready to walk through. Inside, Elias showed him the damage. Tools stolen, wiring cut, a dead squirrel nailed to the workbench with a note underneath. "Next time it's you." Darius read it twice. His face didn't move. Then he placed the note in an evidence bag he pulled from his coat. "You brought a kit?" Elias asked, almost amused. "I brought everything. You think this is a mission?" Darius finally looked at him. "It is now." Elias said nothing. But deep down, something uncoiled in his chest, a feeling he hadn't dared let rise. Hope. Later that day, they went to file a formal report. The Lark Haven Police Department building hadn't changed in 30 years. Still smelled like bleach and bad coffee. At the front desk sat Officer Lanning, chewing gum and pretending not to notice them. "We're here to report a break-in," Darius said. Lanning didn't look up. "Garage right, already filed. Nothing new to say." Elias stared him down. "That's not your call to make. I'm just saying." Lanning shrugged. "Sometimes bad luck follows people." Darius leaned forward slowly. "You think this is bad luck?" Lanning's gum froze mid-chew. Before he could answer, the door behind him opened, and in walked Deputy Anders. "Look what the desert dragged back," Anders said, smiling without warmth. "Didn't realize our complaint system had room for fairy tales." Elias stepped between them. "You'd better be careful what you say in front of my son." "Oh, I'm real careful," Anders replied. "I keep tabs on every threat to public peace. And this one," he pointed at Darius, "looks like trouble just waiting to happen." Darius tilted his head. "Then maybe you should ask yourself why I'm smiling." Anders blinked. "You're not smiling." "Exactly." That night, Elias sat at the kitchen table, eyes closed, breathing slow. Darius paced the living room, restless. "Dad," he said at last, "I've seen how this plays out in places with fewer cameras. These guys aren't just bullies. They're organized. They're protected. I know they've got the mayor, the DA, and half the businesses scared stiff. I know. So how do we fight this?" Elias opened his eyes. "Same way I taught you to fix a blown engine." Darius frowned. "One piece at a time." "No," Elias said, "from the inside out." Outside, across the street, a black car sat idle again. Same as before. No lights, no movement. Darius walked to the front porch, stood in plain view, arms crossed. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The engine coughed to life and drove off into the night. By morning, the people of Larkhaven were already whispering. Someone had seen Darius Monroe outside his father's garage, stone-faced, arms crossed, not blinking. Someone else said they saw him at the diner speaking to the waitress whose cousin was beaten by police and never got justice. And someone swore he walked into the county recorder's office and walked out 30 minutes later with a folder under his arm. They didn't know who he was, but they knew what he wasn't. He wasn't afraid. In the back of the auto shop, what was left of it, Darius sat with the folder open on Elias's workbench. Pages spread across the table like a battlefield. Property violations, insurance threats, denied permits, citations for invented infractions, all with names attached, mostly Anders. Sometimes Fisher, occasionally the mayor. "This is a pattern," Darius murmured, eyes scanning fast. "They've been doing this for years." Elias poured black coffee into a chip mug and placed it beside him. "I told you, it's not just about me. They target veterans, minorities, single mothers, anyone who won't pay." Darius nodded. "That changes now." He pulled out a small voice recorder and placed it between them. "I'm going to make them confess." Darius's first stop was Reggie Bell's barbershop. Reggie was 63 with silver in his beard and sorrow in his eyes. He'd once had a booming business, 3 chairs running, customers lined up down the block. Now only 1 chair remained. "You really think you can fix this?" Reggie asked as he cleaned his clippers. "I don't need to fix it," Darius replied. "I just need the truth." Reggie hesitated. Then he reached into his drawer and pulled out a water-stained envelope. Inside were photographs. His storefront, broken windows, racist graffiti, an incident report filed and ignored. One note written in red ink, "Pay your dues or pay the price." "I got this the day after I told Anders to get off my porch," Reggie said. "A week later, my nephew got pulled over and didn't make it home." Darius slid the envelope into his bag. He didn't say thank you. He said, "We won't let it stand." Later, he went to the Elm Cafe where Mariella, the owner, had once pressed charges after a deputy groped her waitress. The case vanished. The waitress quit. Business slowed. But the cameras? They still worked. Darius plugged a flash drive into her old Dell computer and copied over security footage dated 14 months ago. "You be careful," Mariella whispered, eyes darting toward the window. "They should be," Darius replied, pulling his hood back up. By nightfall, his map of Larkhaven was pinned to the garage wall. Red dots marked the victims. Black pins marked the threats. A yellow one marked Tom Anders' house. He didn't say much to Elias over dinner. Just this: "We go in 2 days." Elias stirred his spoon slowly. "You sure?" Darius looked up. "You taught me to follow through." A long pause. Then Elias nodded. "Then let's make it count." Meanwhile, across town, inside the dim back room of the Blue Ridge Tavern, Anders sat nursing a beer with Fisher and Lanning. "He's snooping," Lanning muttered. "Asking questions, showing up at people's doors." Fisher shook his head. "Let him snoop. The minute he steps wrong, we nail him for obstruction." Anders didn't speak for a while. He stared into the foam of his beer. Finally, he muttered, "We should have finished the job with the garage." "Too messy," Fisher said. "Not messy enough," Anders replied. He stood. "Get me the contact." Lanning swallowed. "The one from Westboro." Anders nodded once. "We send a message. Same one we sent his mother." But Darius wasn't waiting. That night, wearing black from head to toe, he slipped past the police station's perimeter. He moved like a ghost. Inside, he accessed the unlocked maintenance hatch Elias once helped build during the renovation 10 years prior. Every blueprint was in his head. He made it to the evidence room, took photographs, copied files, collected names. By the time he left, no one knew he'd ever been there. But the storm was already building. The next morning came cloaked in mist, as if the town itself was holding its breath. Elias sat on the porch sipping coffee from a rusted thermos, eyes on the street like a soldier on watch. His knees ached from the cold, but he welcomed it. It kept him sharp. He thought about everything he'd built and everything that had been taken. And still, he hadn't told Darius everything. There were secrets he carried in his chest like shrapnel. Some things a man swallows to protect his son. Inside the shop, Darius was stitching together a digital case file connecting timestamps, audio clips, written testimonies, photographs. Every piece of data pointed in one direction, a decades-long campaign of fear and extortion. He labeled the folder, Operation Crow's Nest Larkhaven Police Corruption Evidence. He wasn't a cop, but he knew the system. He'd served in military intelligence. He understood how to build a wall of truth strong enough to break through silence. All he needed now was the final thread, a confession. And he knew just the man to give it to him. That evening, Darius walked into the VFW hall during open mic night. Old men told war stories while sipping lukewarm beer. Flags hung on every wall, faded proud. Darius scanned the room until he saw him, Richard Penn, retired officer, once Anders' training supervisor. He was in his 60s now, gut hanging over his belt, laugh loud and empty. Darius slid onto the stool beside him. "Marine Corps," he said. "Army, 1st Infantry." Richard replied, eyeing him sideways. "Who's asking?" "Someone looking for the truth about Anders." Richard's smile faded. "Careful, son, you're poking sleeping dogs." "They're not sleeping," Darius replied. "They're devouring this town." Richard took a slow sip of his beer, then looked straight ahead. "You recording this?" A pause. Then Richard spoke just loud enough to be drowned out by the clink of pool balls behind them. "Anders always had a mean streak. Came out of nowhere like bad wiring in a pretty house. But I covered for him. We all did. Thought we were protecting the badge." He looked down. "But we weren't. We were protecting rot." Darius didn't press. He just listened. 5 years ago, there was a kid, black, just 16. Anders pulled him over, said he fit the description. The boy's mother raised hell. A week later, her store was raided for tax evasion. Charges never stuck, but she left town. Darius stared at him. "You let that happen?" Richard's eyes glistened. "I've let a lot happen." Darius stood. "Then help me stop it." He handed over a card. "Call this number when you're ready to testify, but if you lie, I'll make sure your name's remembered for the wrong reason." He turned and walked out. Richard didn't move, just stared at the card and the door Darius had left open behind him. That night, Darius returned home to find Elias waiting in the kitchen, an unopened letter in front of him. "What's this?" Darius asked. Elias hesitated. "Something I should have shown you a long time ago." He slid it over. Darius opened it carefully. The paper was old, but the ink hadn't faded. It was a letter from Darius's mother, dated 1997. She had written it before she died. It wasn't just a goodbye, it was a warning. "If anything happens to me, don't trust Sheriff Keller." He came to the house asking questions, said he knew what Elias did overseas, said he'd make sure our boy grew up safe as long as we stayed quiet. But I don't trust him. I never did. Darius read it twice, then a third time. "What did you do?" Dad Elias didn't answer right away. He just looked out the window, voice quiet. "I made a deal I thought would protect you. But that deal planted the roots of what's choking this town now." Darius stood still. Elias turned to face him. "But it ends with us." "You understand," Darius nodded slowly. And for the first time since returning, he reached for his father, not as a soldier, but as a son. The next morning was too still. Even the birds seemed hesitant to sing. Darius woke early, already dressed, sitting on the porch before the sky turned orange. He didn't drink coffee like his father. He sat with water and silence, two things the military had taught him to respect. At 6:12 a.m., his burner phone buzzed once. No number, just a message. "Ready to talk. Meet me where the town forgets." He knew what it meant. The old rail yard on the east edge of Larkhaven, abandoned 20 years ago after the factory shut down. No lights, no witnesses, just rust and ghosts. By 7 a.m., Darius was there. The air smelled like iron and old secrets. He crouched behind a stack of collapsed freight crates listening. Footsteps, then a voice gravelly low. Shouldn't have come alone. It was Richard Penn. Darius stepped out of the shadows. "You said you were ready." "I am," Penn replied, eyes darting. "But I need to know, once I give you names, what happens next." Darius's answer was quiet but firm. "Then we tear the whole system out by its roots." Penn handed him a flash drive. "Everything I've got: body cam footage, Anders erased IA reports that were buried, witness complaints. It's not just him, it's half the department." Darius pocketed it. "Why now?" he asked. Penn's eyes welled. "Because I have a granddaughter who starts high school next year. I want her to believe the badge means something again." A moment passed. Then from the distance, tires skidding, doors slamming, Darius grabbed Penn's arm. "Run." But it was too late. Three unmarked SUVs pulled up in a triangle formation, boxing them in. Anders stepped out, first hand resting casually on his holster, sunglasses glinting. "Well, well," he said, grinning. "Didn't expect to see you two having a secret picnic." Penn tensed. Anders whistled. Deputies moved in fast. Fisher grabbed Penn. Two others rushed Darius. He let them take him for now. Because the storm wasn't over, it had just shifted inside. Back at the Larkhaven Police Department, Darius was dragged through the back entrance. No rights read, no paperwork filed. They shoved him into a storage room, zip-tied his wrist behind a support beam. Anders stepped in last. "You think you're some kind of hero," he said, crouching in front of Darius. "Coming back here, poking around, turning folks against us." Darius said nothing. "You want to know the real problem with guys like you?" Anders continued, leaning closer. "You believe in systems. You believe in truth. But truth is whatever I say it is in this town." Behind him, Fisher chuckled. Anders stood up, cracking his knuckles. "And your father? He's next. We're going to finish what we started." Darius met his gaze. His voice was calm, cold, military cold. "You just made the last mistake of your life." At that exact moment, Elias was slipping on his old Marine jacket, the one with faded patches and stitched repairs. He opened the garage floor hatch and pulled out a box wrapped in plastic. Inside, his field radio, a burner phone, and a key. He dialed a number only two people in the world had ever called him on. A clipped voice answered. "Go." Elias spoke only two words, "Code Ember." Then he hung up. They never thought the old man would still remember. They never thought he had friends still watching. But Code Ember wasn't just a phrase. It was a signal, one embedded deep in a forgotten corner of a network most Americans never knew existed. A list of names, a quiet brotherhood of men and women who had fought together in the worst conditions the world had ever known. Some became security contractors. Some disappeared. And some were waiting for this very call. In a reinforced apartment in Atlanta, a retired signals expert paused his coffee mid-sip and opened a locked case. In Detroit, a woman who once commanded a drone strike team pulled a duffel bag from beneath her bed and loaded her sidearm. In Portland, a former hacker spun her chair around, typed 2 lines of code, and hijacked the Lark Haven Police Department's internal servers without tripping a single alarm. The Ember network had reawakened. Back in the Lark Haven PD storage room, Darius kept his breathing steady. His wrists ached, his head throbbed, but his mind was working. He had studied Anders's type before, authoritarian, performative, easily rattled when the stage collapsed beneath them. Darius had learned to weaponize silence, and now it was Anders who looked uneasy. The door burst open. Deputy Lanning rushed in, phone shaking in his hand. "Uh, you need to see this." Anders grabbed it, and his face drained of color. Every screen in the department was flashing red. Internal breach, confidential files accessed, system override. "Who's doing this?" Fisher yelled. No one answered, because outside in the dark beyond the department's tinted windows, the real war had arrived. Elias Monroe wasn't dressed for show. Combat boots, green flannel, gloves. He stood on the roof of the hardware store across from the police station, peering through binoculars, a radio in hand. "Team Echo, you're green." From a blacked-out van down the street, 2 operatives stepped out, one tall and wide, with a silenced rifle slung across his chest, the other short and silent, tapping on a tablet that disrupted the PD's Wi-Fi. In seconds, cameras went blind. By the time anyone noticed, the front doors of the station had been manually locked from the outside. They weren't coming in to ask permission. They were coming to take someone back. Inside, the hallway lights buzzed, flickered, then died completely. Anders froze. Lanning stammered, "That's not power failure, sir. That's controlled disruption." Darius smiled, the faintest curve of his mouth. "You should have done your homework." Anders spun toward him. "What did you do?" "Didn't do anything," Darius said. "My father did." 2 smoke canisters hissed through the air vents, not explosive, just dense cold fog. Visibility dropped to inches. The silence that followed was even worse, interrupted only by muffled grunts and crashing chairs. One by one, the officers in the building were disarmed, zip-tied, and dropped into the bullpen like stunned cattle. None of them could identify their attackers, except one, Anders. He stood in his office, chest heaving, pistol drawn, pointed at the door. Footsteps outside. Then the door creaked open, and Elias stepped in. It had been decades since Elias had stood toe-to-toe with someone who wanted him dead. Anders stared at him, pistol shaking. "You think you're going to take me down with a look, old man?" "No," Elias said. "I brought your retirement papers." And with that, he nodded once. The figure behind Anders slammed the butt of a rifle against his skull. Anders crumpled to the floor like a broken toy. 5 minutes later, Darius was cut loose. He stepped over Fisher's unconscious body in the hallway, grabbed the flash drive Anders had taken from him, and walked out the front door. The Ember team vanished into the night. By dawn, they would be gone from every database. The servers at Lark Haven PD would crash from a technical error. And every confession Darius had recorded, every file Elias had gathered, every testimony from victims, it would all go to the state's Civil Rights Task Force. This time, it wouldn't be swept away. This time, justice would echo. The Lark Haven Police Department reopened 2 days later, but something in the air had changed. The usual smirks were gone. Officers walked lighter, quieter, as if the walls themselves had started whispering. Not a single mention was made of the blackout. No press statement, no official memo, just silence and fear. Because Anders was gone. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. He didn't resign, he didn't transfer. His desk was cleared, his badge missing, and his house abandoned. And the message had been made clear: play with fire and Ember will answer. At home, Elias was back under his truck, tightening bolts like he used to. But the hum of the ratchet wasn't enough to quiet the war still raging in his chest. "You okay?" Darius asked, watching from the shop doorway. "Define okay," Elias muttered. "Alive. Unarrested. Garage intact." Elias cracked a dry smile. "By those standards, I'm doing great." He slid out and sat up, brushing oil from his hands. "But you know this isn't the end." "I know," Darius said. "But now we fight on our terms." They sat for a moment in the calm, just the clang of tools, the scent of engine grease, the kind of peace forged in aftermath, until the mailbox clanked. Darius walked over. Inside was a plain envelope, no stamp, no return address. He opened it carefully. Inside, a single photo. It was a blurry security cam still, taken from inside a parking garage. The figure in the image had his back turned, but Darius recognized the height the gate. Anders, still alive, still moving, still dangerous. That night, Darius stood outside staring up at the stars. The sky was wide, endless, and still not enough to clear his mind. Elias stepped out and joined him. "You think he'll come back?" Darius asked. Elias didn't answer at first. Then he said, "A man like that doesn't disappear. He retreats, he watches, he waits." Darius clenched his jaw. "Then so will we." But Elias shook his head. "No, son, we won't wait. We build, we grow. We make sure that next time there's no crack for men like him to crawl out of." How Elias looked at him really looked. "You said you wanted to fix this town." "I do." "Then run for the board. Take a seat at the table. Rewrite the rules." Darius blinked. "You want me to go political? I want you to go strategic," Elias said. "You know how to break a system from the outside, but fixing it, that takes something harder." Weeks passed, then months, and slowly things changed. Elias's garage reopened full hours, no more inspections, no more threats. The community began coming back one neighbor at a time. First Miss Jean with her rusted Buick, then the Alvarez twins, then Mr. Delroy, who hadn't trusted a mechanic since 1993. They didn't just bring business. They brought stories, names, receipts, memories. And every thread became part of the case Darius built quietly, methodically, until the state attorney general called his burner and said, "Let's talk." But one thing haunted him still, a dream. Each night he saw Anders, not hiding, not fleeing, but watching, always one step ahead, always smiling, as if saying, "You may have shaken the system, but I built the cracks." 3 months later, Darius Monroe stood behind a podium in the Larkhaven Town Hall, wearing a navy blue jacket, no tie, just a pin on his collar that read, "Truth never retires." He wasn't there to campaign. He wasn't there to ask permission. He was there to testify. The auditorium was full. Some came out of respect, others out of suspicion, and a few just to see if the old stories were really true. Behind him sat folders, dozens each labeled with a case number, time-stamped video, stills, handwritten statements. Elias was in the front row, arms folded, eyes steady. A reporter from the Tri-County Herald whispered to her cameraman, "Why now? Why him?" Because no one else had dared to come back. Darius took a breath. Then he began. For 30 years, Larkhaven operated on two systems, one above the table where laws were written and taxes collected, the other beneath. A hidden ledger of protection, fees, false arrests, and ruined lives. A murmur rippled across the room. Darius continued, calm and unwavering. "I know this because I lived it, because my father, Elias Monroe, was almost buried by it, and because the man who tried to bury him is still out there." He paused, let the silence stretch, then said the name Ethan Anders. At the back of the room, a woman stood abruptly and stormed out. Darius's eyes followed her. He didn't recognize her face, but he would soon. After the hearing, Darius sat in his truck, the door open, 1 foot on the curb. He was drained, but not empty. He'd done what he came to do, until a figure approached, short, sharp eyes, gray scarf. "Mr. Monroe," she asked. "Yes." She handed him a small envelope. This was dropped off at the Tribune's office. No name, just said it was for you. He took it hard, already uneasy. Inside was a photograph, another one. This time not Anders. It was a picture of his mother, taken the week she died. Behind her, blurry but unmistakable, was a younger Anders, watching from across the street, the timestamp 3 days before her death. Darius's grip tightened around the photo. He'd grown up thinking it was an accident, a malfunctioning streetlight, a drunk driver, a tragedy. But now it felt like a warning that had been sent decades too early, and only now fully understood. That night, back at the house, Elias held the photo in his hands. His face didn't change, but his knuckles went white around the frame. "I always wondered," he said softly. "You think he did it?" Darius asked. Elias looked up, voice like gravel. "I don't think, I know." They sat in silence. Then Elias added, "But this changes things. If your mother was targeted, this wasn't just about intimidation. This was war, and we never saw it start." Darius stared at the fire. I see it now, then finish it, Elias said. The right way. But the fire that was lit that night would spread. Because the woman who'd left the hearing, she wasn't just some angry townsperson. Her name was Marla Anders. And Ethan was her brother. And she wasn't running away. She was preparing for what came next. Marla Anders lived in a modest colonial outside of Ashpine, 20 miles north of Larkhaven. A tidy yard, a wind chime that never moved, a neighborhood that smiled too easily. She hadn't spoken to her brother in over 10 years, not since the incident in Denton, where two protesters turned up dead after a traffic stop gone sideways. She'd warned him. She'd begged him. But Ethan was never one to retreat. He didn't believe in consequences, only control. And now he was being hunted by ghosts of his own design. Marla locked the door behind her, drew the curtains, and pulled out a worn metal case from beneath her floorboards. Inside, a stack of letters, faded photos, and a single flash drive marked with Ethan's initials. She clicked it into her laptop. Old video files, corrupt folders, password-protected documents, and one folder titled simply Monroe. Her throat tightened. This wasn't just about dirty cops anymore. This was about something Ethan had buried and buried deep. Back in Larkhaven, Darius sat on the back steps of his father's house, the photo of his mother still in his hand. The air was heavy with memory. She used to sit right here humming while she watered her lilies. The scent of lavender still clung faintly to the earth even after all these years. He remembered her laughter, bright and sudden, and the way she would touch his cheek and say, "You've got your father's eyes, but my fire." Now that fire burned like a torch. Because what happened to her might not have been random. It might have been part of the first strike in a decades-long campaign to silence, erase, and dominate. Anders didn't just abuse the badge. He used it like a scalpel, cutting out threats, silencing dissent. And maybe his mother had seen something she wasn't supposed to. Elias emerged from the garage carrying a weathered folder. "Got something you should see." He handed Darius a yellowed incident report from 1992. It detailed a car crash involving Evelyn Monroe, Darius's mother. There was no mention of another vehicle, no breathalyzer, no dash cam footage, just a single handwritten note in the margin witness account pulled insufficient credibility. Next to it, a signature, E. Anders. Darius felt his chest go still. He had been 4 years old. He remembered flashing lights. He remembered his father's silence. But now it all looked different. It looked like cover-up. That night, Elias made a phone call. It took 7 rings. Then a voice answered, "This line is supposed to be dead." Elias didn't hesitate. "Need to call in a marker." The voice paused. "Monroe, yeah, you sure know, but it's time." Silence, then address. Elias gave it. "Be there by dawn." Somewhere near the state border, Marla packed a go-bag, closed her laptop, and left a letter on her table. It read, "If I don't come back, tell the truth." This wasn't about justice, it was about cleaning house. And Ethan's house was never clean. Then she locked the door behind her and vanished. By the time dawn reached Larkhaven, a matte gray Jeep Wrangler with out-of-state plates had pulled into Elias Monroe's driveway. The man who stepped out wore desert boots, black cargo pants, and a faded leather jacket. Hair silver at the temples, eyes sharp scanning. Caleb Rourke. To most of the world, he didn't exist. To Elias, he was the man who once saved his life under sniper fire in Kandahar. To Darius, he was a living myth. "Didn't think I'd see you again," Elias said. "You didn't?" Caleb replied, shaking his hand. "You called. That means trouble's not just visiting." It moved in. Darius handed him the flash drive with the Monroe folder. "We need to know what Anders was hiding, and why he kept my mother's death on file." Caleb nodded, slid it into a hardened laptop, and went to work. Across town, the city buzzed as usual, but a storm was coming. Larkhaven District Court received a surprise request for an emergency hearing signed by the state's attorney general and backed by confidential testimony. Darius's name was listed as primary petitioner. The clerk blinked when she read it. "Didn't he just testify?" "Yes," someone whispered, "but he didn't testify everything." Back at the house, Caleb cracked the encryption. The screen lit up with folders labeled Monroe, Operative Witness 17A, Clean Slate, Redemption Files, Phase 2. He clicked the first. A video began. Grainy, time-stamped, the audio shaky. Evelyn Monroe sat across from an unseen interviewer. Her voice was tired but clear. "I saw them switch the files. The real case went missing. And the man who switched them, he had a badge." He had Anders with him. She paused. He knew I saw. I was supposed to testify the next week, but the summons got pulled. Then the car accident. The video glitched, then cut to black. Darius stood frozen. Elias clenched his fists. My God, Elias whispered. She was going to expose them. Anders knew, Darius said, and he silenced her before she could. Caleb nodded grimly. She wasn't the only one. These folders, names of others, all marked as discredited, disappeared, or deceased. It was a pattern of erasure. Meanwhile, Marla Anders stood outside a federal building in Fairmont, waiting for the flash drive duplicate to upload into a secure system. She didn't trust Larkhaven courts. She didn't trust the state's Internal Affairs Board. But she trusted one thing: documentation. That's why she had sent the letter to a federal prosecutor, sealed, dated, and stamped with a trail of receipts. If she disappeared, the world would know why. That evening, Elias opened the garage, not to fix an engine, but to prepare for the last part of his journey. He pulled down an old footlocker. Inside was his marine dress blues, folded perfectly, still bearing his name, still smelling faintly of desert wind and time. He laid them across the bench, stared at them for a long moment. Tomorrow, he said, I faced them like a soldier. Darius nodded. And I finished what Mom started. But as they packed their evidence and readied their final moves, a black SUV rolled through town, tinted windows, out-of-state plates, and a man in the back with eyes like frost and a smile that promised no one was ever really safe. Ethan Anders had returned, and this time he didn't come alone. The SUV pulled to a stop in front of a shuttered law office on 3rd and Bell. The sign above the door still read Anders and Grayson Legal Services, though the building had long since fallen into disuse. The paint was faded, the glass fogged with time, but the security system inside was state-of-the-art. Not that anyone in Larkhaven knew that, because Anders had never truly left. He had only gone underground. Inside the back room of that building, Ethan Anders stood before a map pinned with red threads, photos, transcripts, police rosters, financial flows. One word scrawled across the center in thick black ink: Monroe. Behind him stood 2 men dressed in plain tactical black. Not officers, not locals, mercenaries. You sure it's time? One of them asked. Anders turned, eyes cold. They made it time. They want the truth. Let's show them how deep it goes. That same night at Elias Monroe's house, Darius and Caleb Rourke reviewed the last decrypted file. A memo stamped clean slate, internal use only. It detailed a plan dating back over 20 years. Operation Clean Slate was designed to root out dissent, control court outcomes, and manage public narrative in Larkhaven's district. Targeted individuals would be neutralized via legal entrapment, reputational damage, or where necessary, fatal incident staging. At the bottom of the document, authorized by E. Anders, final clearance redacted. Caleb leaned back in his chair. This isn't just corruption. This is government-sanctioned control. Elias stared at the screen, and my wife was the first casualty. Early morning light crept across the courthouse steps as Elias and Darius approached. A crowd had already formed. Whispers ran like wind. Is it true? Did they really find files? Will they reopen the Monroe case? Cameras flashed, but inside the halls were silent. Too silent. Darius slowed. Something was off. Caleb emerged from behind a column, nodding once. They've been here. He handed Darius a sealed envelope. A threat, inside a single bullet casing, and a typed note: walk away, or next time it won't be empty. EA. That night, they moved everything to a safe house. Caleb, Elias, and Darius took shifts. They knew Anders was circling, they just didn't know how close. In Ashpine, Marla Anders received a burner call. She almost didn't answer. But when she did, her face went pale. The voice on the other end was her brother. You always did like betraying family, didn't you? She swallowed hard. What do you want? You started something you don't understand, Marla. Stop digging. Then, tell the Monroes to stand down, or I'll finish what I started all those years ago. The line went dead. Marla stared at the phone in her hand for a long time. Then she packed her bags and headed for Larkhaven. Because the next move wouldn't be made in shadows. It would be made in court, on record, for the world to hear. And Anders would be watching. From the gallery, from the shadows, or from behind a badge he no longer deserved. But Darius wasn't afraid, Because when justice runs in your blood, you don't need permission to fight. You just need proof. The courtroom was silent as Darius Monroe took the stand. No cameras allowed, no live stream, but the seats were full. Every reporter in the county, activists from 3 states, and a handful of faces from the past that Darius never thought he'd see again. Front row far right, Marla Anders. She didn't look away when he entered. Back row far left, a man in a tan coat, sunglasses, indoors. Caleb Rourke clocked him instantly. Anders' eyes and ears were in the room. But this time it didn't matter because Darius wasn't here to accuse. He was here to expose. He began with the photo of his mother, Evelyn Monroe, taken 3 days before her death, with a shadowy Ethan Anders in the background. Then came the flash drive, the encrypted documents, the Operation Clean Slate memo with his mother's name on it. Each piece of evidence was projected on the screen for the courtroom to see, and each time a page turned, the air got heavier. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Justice Brenner, leaned forward. "Mr. Monroe, are you suggesting your mother's death was orchestrated?" "I'm not suggesting," Darius said. "I'm showing you." She was silenced. "By whom?" He looked up, his voice firm. "By Ethan Anders, then a captain, now a ghost." The prosecution objected, calling it speculative. Justice Brenner overruled. "Continue." Darius swallowed, then played the video. The one of his mother recorded in secret, warning about falsified case records and a badge-wearing conspirator. "I never saw this until this week," Darius said, "and neither did the public, because it was buried with her." There was a murmur. Marla closed her eyes, her throat tight. When he stepped down, Caleb stood and approached the bench with 2 files. "Your Honor, these were recovered from a secondary site formerly owned by Anders and Grayson. They detail surveillance, false charges, and cover-ups that implicate not only Anders, but several high-ranking officials who quietly resigned in the last decade." He dropped the folders with a satisfying thump. "And I believe the witness who can confirm this just entered the building." The back doors opened. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Marla Anders stepped forward. "I wasn't subpoenaed," she said calmly, "but I can't stay silent anymore." For the next 2 hours, Marla told the story of a family divided, of a brother who once believed in justice and slowly became its executioner, of files she had secretly backed up, letters she intercepted, and the night she saw Ethan return from handling a situation, his hands bruised as clothes, reeking of fire. She never asked, but she always knew, and now she said, her voice cracking, "I'm done protecting him." She handed over the drive. "The rest is in here." After recess, the judge returned to her seat with a new expression, half grief, half steel. She looked to the gallery. "If what I've seen today is true," she said, "then this courtroom, this city, and the badge that once stood for order, all need reckoning. A beat, effective immediately. I am signing an injunction barring Ethan Anders from holding or influencing any position of law enforcement, public or private, within this state." Cheers broke out. Reporters rushed out. Elias stood tall and proud. But Darius, he just exhaled. Not in relief, in readiness. Because this wasn't over, not yet. Outside, as the crowd spilled into the plaza, Caleb leaned toward Darius. "You did it." Darius shook his head. "Not yet. Anders is still out there." And now Caleb said, glancing toward the rooftops, "He knows you're not afraid." The night after the hearing, Larkhaven didn't sleep. Downtown buildings lit up like fireflies, news crews, candlelight vigils, murmurs of justice on lips that once feared to speak. For the first time in years, the silence that had ruled this city like a curse began to lift. But in the shadows, Ethan Anders moved like smoke. He watched the footage from court, paused on Marla's face, paused longer onto Darius's. The smirk on his lips was gone. In its place, something darker, older. "I taught them too well," he muttered. "Now they think they can teach me a lesson." Back at the safe house, Darius stood in the kitchen holding a cup of black coffee he hadn't sipped. Elias sat nearby reviewing a list of names, some crossed out, others underlined. "They'll come for us now," Elias said, "and not through the front door." "I hope they do," Darius replied quietly. Caleb entered from the garage with a shortwave radio, picked up a burst on a military encryption band. Someone's coordinating off-grid, not law enforcement. Elias frowned. Could be Mercs, could be Anders using old contacts. Caleb looked at Darius. "Either way, they're coming. We move tonight." 2 hours later, they were gone. The safe house was wiped, no prints, no files. Nothing left behind but a copy of the Monroe file, burned and nailed to the front door. Across town, Anders' black SUV circled the block. Too late. Marla stayed in a local hotel under an assumed name. That night, someone broke into her room, but they found it empty and a flash drive already mailed to the State Ethics Commission. With a handwritten note, "I'm not the same little sister anymore." The next day, the district attorney called for a special grand jury into the Larkhaven Police Department's historical practices. The press called it the reckoning. Former officers came forward. Anonymous sources leaked emails, files, surveillance tapes. It was like a dam had cracked. And Anders. His name was everywhere, but his face was nowhere. Until 3 Tavar, Hufiniam. A red light camera on Route 19 captured a blurred plate. Caleb traced it, and it led to a cabin. Isolated, off-grid. Not listed on any registry, but owned under a false LLC used by Anders back in 1994. Darius nodded once. "Let's end this." They arrived at dawn, fog curled around the trees. The air smelled of pine and smoke. The cabin stood quiet, windows dark, no movement. Caleb flanked the side. Elias checked the rear. Darius stepped onto the front porch and knocked. Once, twice. Silence. Then a click. The door creaked open on its own. Inside, the cabin was empty of furniture but full of memories. Photos on the wall, some of Evelyn Monroe circled in red, some of Darius as a child, a map of Larkhaven with X's over certain homes, schools, businesses, and at the center, a photo of Elias Monroe, a dagger stuck through it. This wasn't a hideout, Elias said behind him. It was a hunting lodge. Then came the voice, crackling through an old speaker. "Glad you could make it, Darius." It was Anders, live, watching, somewhere nearby. "I thought you should see the blueprint before the finale." Darius clenched his fists. "Where are you?" "Anders," the speaker crackled again. "I'm everywhere, Justice forgot to look." The cabin door slammed shut behind them. Darius spun, weapon raised. Caleb already had his sidearm drawn, moving low and silent toward the back. The lights flickered on overhead, harsh and artificial, triggered by motion sensors. The walls were no longer just plaster and insulation. They were lined with monitors, each screen showing different angles of Larkhaven. The courthouse, the police department, the Monroe home, surveillance feeds. Some dated weeks ago, others live. "This isn't just obsession," Caleb muttered. "It's control." At the center console, a blinking red light pulsed beside a dusty intercom. Darius hit the button. "Face me, Anders." Static. Then his voice smooth and deliberate. "You still think this is about revenge, about your mother? This is bigger than her, than you, than me. This town needed order, and I gave it to them." On one monitor, they watched as 3 black SUVs pulled up 2 blocks from the courthouse. Unmarked. Fast. Caleb swore under his breath. He's planning something. Right now. Darius stared at the screen, mind racing. "We've been baited." Suddenly, a laptop on the table beeped. "New file received. Project Justify. Final phase." They opened it, and what they found made Elias sit down, his face going pale. Project Justify objective. Orchestrate civil unrest to justify federal intervention. Use Monroe case to stir public division. Initiate false flag attacks during protests. Control narrative via planted operatives. Destroy public trust in court reform. Primary obstacle, Darius Monroe. Secondary risk, Elias Monroe. At the bottom, directive silence by any means necessary. Darius stared at the screen. "He's not running." Caleb nodded grimly. "He's escalating." Elias stood again, voice tight with fury. "He wants to collapse the town to prove he was the only thing holding it together." Darius's eyes hardened. "Then we hold it together ourselves." They copied the file, uploaded it to 3 secure clouds, then burned the original on a steel tray, letting the flames eat away at the evidence before it could fall into the wrong hands. On their way out, they heard the click of a motion sensor again, this time not from the lights. Caleb shoved them down as a shot tore through the cabin window. Glass exploded. Dust filled the air. Another shot. Then silence. Outside, the woods were quiet. Too quiet. They moved low fast toward their vehicle, but found it with the tires slashed and hood smoking. "They want us boxed in," Caleb said. Darius turned to his father. "We're walking." They disappeared into the trees, GPS off, radio silent. By the time Anders's men swept through the cabin, They found nothing but ash. No hard drives, no witnesses, only a note scrawled in permanent marker on the wall. You made a mistake. You taught us how to hunt. That evening, Larkhaven held its largest protest in history. Thousands gathered peacefully. But on the rooftops, snipers waited. Anders' version of peace. In a secured courthouse chamber, Judge Brenner prepared her final announcement. A full federal inquiry would begin in 48 hours. What she didn't know, she had less than two. Darius and Caleb watched from a nearby roof binoculars, tracking movements, earpieces tuned to police chatter. "It's tonight," Caleb whispered. "He's going to stage the chaos himself." And for the first time in his life, Darius didn't feel like a lawyer. He felt like a soldier. The night felt too still. Downtown Larkhaven shimmered under streetlights, banners fluttering from courthouse steps that now stood for truth instead of fear. But in the shadows, Ethan Anders' machine was still turning silent, calculated, and ready to strike. On rooftops above the protest, disguised operatives unpacked long cases. Not signs, not banners, rifles, each trained on different parts of the crowd, including the elevated platform where Judge Brenner would speak. Down below, Elias Monroe stood beside his son, both of them dressed as civilians unnoticed. In Caleb's ear, a tactical earpiece crackled. 3 positions confirmed. Northeast West Wing and Clock Tower, all military grade. Darius exhaled. "This isn't a protest anymore. It's a trap." "Then let's spring it," Caleb said. From the clock tower, the lead shooter checked his scope crosshairs fixed on Judge Brenner's podium. A finger curled around the trigger, but before the shot could land, crack. A flashbang burst from the shadows behind him, followed by a figure in black tackling him to the ground. Marla Anders, armed, prepared, done hiding. "You wanted to burn the city?" she hissed, cuffing him with military zip ties. "But we already saw the smoke." Across the plaza, Caleb moved like a ghost, disarming the second sniper with a chokehold and zip tie. Darius reached the West Wing just in time to see Elias face off against the third, a hulking man with a shaved head and a suppressed rifle. "You don't want to do this," Elias warned. The man sneered. Too late. Elias moved first. The takedown was fast, brutal, efficient. The crowd, unaware of the danger above, erupted in cheers as Judge Brenner stepped to the podium. But Darius didn't listen to her speech. His eyes were scanning, because Anders was still out there. And then he saw him. In the gallery behind the podium, dressed as press fake ID on his lanyard. Ethan Anders, their eyes locked. Anders turned to bolt, but Darius was already moving, vaulting the barriere, chasing him through a maze of alleys and stairwells. They reached a dead-end courtyard where Anders spun knife in hand. "You should have walked away, boy," he growled. "You should have stayed buried," Darius shot back. The fight was short. Anders was strong. Darius was stronger. Driven by justice, by memory, by his mother's voice that still echoed in his soul. A single disarm. A strike to the gut. Anders dropped groaning. Darius cuffed him with the same restraints his mother once wore, and whispered, "Justice runs in my blood." By morning, the news swept across the country. Ex-Captain Anders arrested in connection to decades-long conspiracy sniper plot, foiled by family of former veteran Judge Larkhaven cleared for federal reform panel. The people cheered. The system bent. And for the first time, it didn't break. Outside the courthouse as the sun rose, Darius stood with Elias, Caleb, and Marla. A small group, but enough to change everything. Judge Brenner approached, her robe still dusted from the stage lights. "You brought the truth back to this town," she said. "Whatever happens next, it begins with you." Darius nodded. "It begins with all of us." He looked toward the horizon where the banners of protest still fluttered. Then up at the courthouse steps where a photo of Judge Evelyn Monroe had been placed. Flowers surrounded it. A handwritten note taped beside her picture read, "They tried to silence you, but your son spoke louder." When Officer Ethan Anders orchestrates the wrongful arrest of an elderly black man, he believes it's just another act in a long career of corruption. But what he doesn't know is that the man's son, Darius Monroe, is a federal investigator and the son of a once-silenced judge. What follows is a relentless pursuit of truth, spanning Hidden Files courtroom reveals sniper plots in a final showdown that ends with Anders in cuffs and a city reclaiming its soul. Never underestimate quiet strength. Justice is not always loud, but when it comes, it echoes through generations. Systems can be corrupted, but people united by truth and love can burn those systems down and build something better.